Welcome to Industrial Voices, the podcast where leaders in manufacturing, e-commerce, and logistics share stories and insights on the trends shaping their industries. I'm Bradley Dunn, a commercial real estate broker specializing in industrial real estate across the Southeast. Let's get after it. Welcome to Industrial Voices. Excited for another episode. We have longtime friend of mine, Skeet Ponder, on the show today. Skeet Ponder is a wonderful guy, but he has developed an incredible expertise in a niche that I am personally deeply curious about, which is the timber world. And he has a very long background in this, even going all the way back to like becoming an Eagle Scout back in the day. But he is director of Timberland Resource Valuation at Manulife Investment Management. He leads valuation, underwriting, and due diligence on timberland investments across Manulife's global portfolio. Prior to that, he was at WestRock in fiber procurement, and his education, we always give him a hard time for this, but he is extremely and thoroughly educated. BA in Natural Resources from Sewanee University of the South, Master of Forest Resources from Forest Business at University of Georgia, and then MBA in Finance from Wake Forest University. So Skeet knows a great deal about what it is he does, both from an experience standpoint and then also from an education standpoint. And then he and I, we went to high school together for a very long time. We've stayed in touch all the way through our adult years, and then now here we both live in Charlotte. So I guess, Skeet, we could talk about a number of things, and we often do. We run together, and we talk for hours and don't shut up. And today we're actually going to use a script to make sure we talk about things that are productive. But I guess the first thing is timber is, like, I know very few kids that say, like, oh, when I grow up, I want to be in timber, right? And so, like, you have always had a curiosity about this, and it's always been something that I've associated with you. So, like, talk me through how you gets into timber in the first place.
So when I was growing up, my dad is in the financial services industry, and I've had, stock picking and econ beaten into my head since I was a little kid. I think I started picking stocks when I was in elementary school. And then, I grew up going outside. We've got a family farm in west central Georgia. And so I spent all my weekends there, which probably saved me from getting in a lot of trouble, to be honest. But I love being outside. And so my dad one of his colleagues had a son. I believe that's how it worked. His name's Matt Camp, who ended up being a big mentor of mine, who worked for a company called Timbervest in Atlanta. And we went to lunch, and I learned about what he did. And it was this perfect intersection of econ/finance and being in the woods. And I thought that was incredible. So I went to undergrad kind of thinking I wanted to do something along those lines. Started out as an econ major. That didn't work so hot, probably because I didn't go to class as much as I should have. But I ended up interning at that same place where he worked, Timbervest. And everyone that I worked for when I was there said, hey, if you want to do this, we recommend you go to Georgia. One of them actually wrote one of my rec letters for school, ended up going to Georgia and doing their Master of Forest Business program, and the rest was history.
And so when you started, what do job prospects look like for anyone that maybe is in college and is curious about timber just as a career? Like, when you have the 2 degrees you just described, undergrad and then grad, what companies are you looking at potentially working at?
So there's kind of 2 tracks, especially coming out of Warnell, which is the Georgia Forestry School.
Which is like top of the game, right?
I like to think so, but I'm also on the Young Alumni Board, so I'm a little biased.
Yeah.
But you can go mill side, which is, you're buying wood for the mill. You can go into consulting, which is you're representing, small non-industrial private landowners, like, your typical someone who's got 50 to 100 acres in the family and is trying to figure out what to do with their timber. And, there's 100 different things you can do, but I chose the investment route.
Okay. And so you started elsewhere first, right? So you started at WestRock?
So I actually started with a guy, Jim Branch, who's based in Madison, Georgia. He has some investors, and he more or less invests on their behalf in both agricultural and timberland properties. So I kind of cut my teeth doing that, paying the bills, cruising timber. where I kind of miss that every once in a while, but I'm also glad I'm not covered in poison ivy and ticks 24/7 anymore.
Well, and it's interesting because you do have like an incredible financial background and financial understanding, probably more so than 99% of the people that I know.
I don't know about
But
that.
when I'm texting with you, sometimes an interesting thing happens with you that doesn't happen with anyone else in my life. And I have a brother who sails boats across the ocean, and this doesn't happen with him. It says Skeet is connected to you via satellite services on the iPhone, and I'll get pictures and text from Skeet, and he is in the middle of nowhere on like millions of acres and like parts of the country I didn't even know existed. And so there's two parts of it, right? Like you're in a Charlotte office building, but then you're also in the middle of nowhere sending me pictures of moose that are being skinned and hung up. But yeah, man. So okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Like what I know about you as an individual, and then also like your interests and how you'd land in something like this. So now let's switch over just to like timber in general.
Yeah.
Let's call it Timber 101. But for someone who's brand new to the space or maybe doesn't know anything about it, how would you explain timberland as an asset class?
So the way we'll typically think about it is it's a big inflation hedge, historically at least. And also one of the big things, which we were talking about earlier, is that kind of regardless of what the timber markets are doing or the S&P 500, trees are going to keep getting bigger. And so that's pretty attractive as long as, you're kind of thinking about things appropriately and you pick the right manager. So, trees are going to get bigger no matter what.
And so my redneck understanding, if a tree is bigger, it's more valuable, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
To a certain extent, it can get too big to go through a mill, but for the most part,
like
that's right.
You're not going to wake up one morning and be like, "Oh my gosh, I accidentally let my trees get too big."
Yeah,
like,
you've got years.
It would
to
take
think about
years.
That one.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Years of negligence would have to compound for that to happen. Okay. So where are the primary timber markets in the U.S. and then globally?
So U.S., most of the country where you think of trees growing, kind of except for the middle of the country, the Corn Belt, and then kind of going into the Rockies, those aren't as strong as they used to be. Mostly since we stopped harvesting timber on federal land. But the big hot spots are the U.S. South, the Pacific Northwest, and the Northeast, Lake states included.
Okay. And then when I picture, going a little off script here, when I picture timber, I'm thinking like pine trees.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different varieties, species of trees.
Yeah.
Is pine like the gold standard? Is that what you guys deal in most frequently? Or is there like a top 5 species that people traffic in timberland?
Domestically, pine is the biggest in the South, and then Doug fir is the big one in the Northwest. Those are probably the top 2 species.
Okay. And would you make like 2x4s out of you're calling it Doug fir, Douglas firs?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. So would you make 2x4s out of Doug fir the same way you would out of pine? Like, are they used similarly, or do they have different products?
Used similarly, grown very differently.
Okay.
You typically, and we can get into this more later, but my bread and butter is, I grew up in the South, so I know how to grow pine trees decently. When they get too close together, they start competing with each other for nutrients, and then you don't get as much sunlight and, a lot of other biological effects. So you got to remove some of them. It's called thinning. You typically don't thin in the Pacific Northwest unless, you've got some other factor going on.
Okay. That makes sense. And then when you're planting them, are you planting like an actual seed? Pardon me if this is like really elementary, or are you planting saplings that are like from a what would you call it, like a nursery?
Yeah, that.
Okay, so you're planting saplings, like you're giving yourself the best possible shot that a tree is sprouting there.
Yeah,
okay.
The trees are, they've grown in a nursery. There's several companies that's what they specialize in, is breeding the best genetics possible.
Okay,
and we use those.
And then give me an idea of scale, right? Because you and your competitors own millions of acres, which is just mind-boggling. Like, this stuff is measured in square miles. If you're doing a planting, like, how many of these saplings are you buying?
So, this day and age in the South, you can think of, we're planting in the low to mid 300 or 400 trees per acre, and then you scale that up to, a couple 100,000 acres, and you can do the math. It's a lot.
That's awesome. Like the sheer scope of that and scale of that, are these vendors that you're using to do these types of things pretty mobile? or do they have operations that set up close by? Like how do you even coordinate the logistics of that?
You got to refrigerate them, and they come by 18-wheeler, and you typically keep them cold. And you pick the time of year, when the tree's going to, take the best too, but also, it's a little bit colder, so you don't cook your seedlings in an 18-wheeler.
Got it. But there's vendors, right, that might be anchored in or headquartered in Charlotte, and they're going to help you with an Alabama property. Am I thinking about that correctly?
They've got nurseries all over.
Okay, and then they'll send a foreman and a crew out for a week and then come back home.
So they'll typically deliver the seedlings, at least from the last time I did this, which has been a while. And you unload the seedlings, and they're all in boxes, and then you've got tree planting crews who will either put them in by hand, which is back-breaking work. You're taking, a piece of hand garden equipment, obviously a little more specialized, hitting the dirt, opening it up, throwing a seedling in there, depending on if it's coming out of a container or if it's bare root, putting that in the ground and just walking laps, doing that bent over all day.
Oh, my goodness. And so when you guys are actually, sorry, I'm getting way off topic here, but when you guys are underwriting, like, and you're putting these trees in the ground, what percentage of these trees are you anticipating will make it to maturity? Is it like 90%? Is it 80%?
We would like for it to be at least 90.
Okay.
So we've had some success using containerized seedlings versus, bare root, which it's pretty self-explanatory. The roots are exposed versus it's in a little plug. The containerized seedlings we've had a lot more success with on the survival front. And it's
assuming they're more expensive.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Okay. So what drives return in a timber investment? Like, how do you make money in timber? Why do people do what you do?
So historically, it's been about a third income and 2/3 appreciation. So I like to think of dirt as a blank canvas. We get inquiries all the time from solar developers, from people wanting to do data centers, from everything in between. Like, we do so many different things as stewards of land to help drive that return. And, we want to do it sustainably and responsibly because we think stewardship is good business. Mm-hmm. So that's what helps drive some of the appreciation too. And especially if you're up in Virginia these days, there's a lot of data center talk up there, which is pretty nice as a large landowner.
Yeah, I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
And you talk about stewardship and a lot of these like programs and ways to make money off of these properties. Your depth of knowledge as it relates to government programs, incentives, and all of those types of things is staggering. And we have a mutual friend who you help with a lot of those projects. And every time that you guys come up, like, you found him another $20,000 that he can make off his land that I just had no idea even existed. I think removing barbed wire was one of them.
Yeah, he found that on his own, actually.
Okay, got it. But yeah, it's wild how much as it relates to this stuff. And I'm sure there's a million ways to make money off of timberland that's not just timber. But you said 2/3 appreciation, 1/3 income. When you're thinking about appreciation, so let's say you buy 1 million acres,
mm-hmm.
Is that appreciation really coming from like 10% of the acreage that's like closest to interstates and closest to housing and infrastructure? Or are you envisioning selling the whole 1 million acres off at one time in the future?
So it depends. Sometimes we'll have what we call an HBU program, which is highest and best use, where we will identify, and so I'll talk about Georgia because that's where I grew up and I know best. But say you've got a piece of property around, I-85, kind of in between Noonan and LaGrange, Georgia. You're an industrial guy. You know what's going on down there. I never once thought I'd hear the word data center growing up, going down to our farm in LaGrange, but we're starting to hear it now. So when you have the opportunistic plays, for lack of a better term, that'll come up, you take advantage of them as long as it makes sense and you're doing it the right way.
Yeah. Well, and I think,
but to your point, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Depending on the client and what their objectives are and things like that, say they're only in it for a closed-end fund or something like that for 10 years, you got to do something with it at the end of 10 years.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Now, I remember hearing this for the first time, but the timberland values at the per acre level
mm-hmm.
are so much lower than I thought they would be.
Yeah.
Right? Like industrial land, like we're selling stuff in the city here, like $400,000, $500,000 per acre. Yeah. And so just give me the range. Like if I'm buying 1 million acres in the Pacific Northwest, like how much am I paying per acre?
Pacific
for like good timberland.
Yeah.
Like I want like Class A. The stuff rocks.
Pacific Northwest is significantly more expensive than the Southeast. You can easily be 5,000 acres plus.
$5,000 per acre.
Per acre.
Okay, yeah.
Getting on up to low double digits per acre is not unheard of. It's rare. But in the South, you're between like 1,000 and 3,000 per acre.
Okay, what's the difference? Like, what's the driver of that difference in value?
So in the Pacific Northwest, you've got Doug fir can make you a little bit more money, basically, versus in the South, it's also much more remote. And, I mean, you think of where timberland needs to be, you have to have big pieces of dirt to make this stuff happen. And mills are there, and you're typically just away from a metro. And Pacific Northwest is a little bit more populated as far as that's concerned.
It's more built out.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does a typical investment life cycle look like? So you mentioned a closed-end fund. I know you guys have a ton of different vehicles that you plug into this stuff, but like from planting, growth, harvesting, replanting, like I'm sure you show up at different points in the life cycle at different times, but like in industrial real estate, and there's a lot of people that are in that business that are listening to this, like most of the time people are underwriting on a 5-year hold.
Yeah.
What does like the typical, you sit down at your Excel spreadsheet, like what's your typical hold look like?
What they teach you in school is typically 50 years.
Okay.
So this is a long-term asset class. And the way it's called, the typical way they teach you in school is called either soil expectation value, land expectation value, bare land value. It's the same name for different names for the same thing. But it's basically modeling keeping that piece of property in forestry production in perpetuity.
Okay.
Forever.
And what's the life cycle of like a harvest? So you said 1/3 of the income comes from income, or 1/3 of the value comes from income, which is the harvesting and selling of trees, right?
Yeah.
Like what does that life cycle look like, and how often are we doing that?
So it depends on where you are. Out west, you're cutting between, typically 40-ish years, 40 and 50. But in the South, a pine tree is typically between 20 and 30 years old.
Okay. So an incredibly long period of time.
Yeah.
Now, when I think about this, right, like in our world, like there's a relatively slow churn of product, and it's 5 years, right? How often are sale opportunities even presenting themselves in your world?
A lot, actually.
Okay. So people are getting to year 51 regularly.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
It doesn't seem to be going like full 50. Granted, we do have every once in a while run into a forester who has been like, oh yeah, I planted those trees, and they're almost at retirement age, which is really cool to see. But usually it will trade hands a couple times before that.
Okay. So there's pretty good volume in the space.
Yeah.
And most of these transactions are in how many acres? What's your average deal size? Actually, I guess yours would probably be different from a normal guy, but like Manulife, those players that are in that arena, like
we're usually, 20,000 acres and up.
Okay, so you're not looking at anything below that. It's like
We will
4,500
every
acres
once
pops
in a
up and
while.
you just file that OM, but like for the most part, 20 and up.
Yeah, I mean, if it fits a certain objective, you will consider it for sure. But usually scale is better for a lot of different reasons.
Okay. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about timber investing?
So a lot of people will typically think that, harvesting timber is a bad thing. Timber is America's original renewable resource, right? As long as you replant, which we do, it's going to come back and you just keep going. And a lot of the cool things you think, like the legs on that chair, that was, assuming just for the sake of conversation, that's made out of a pine tree. The carbon that tree took out of the atmosphere is going to be stored in that leg as long as it's sitting there, which a lot of people don't think about. And there's some cool things going on. Like, you're familiar with Pont City Market in Atlanta. Shout out to Troy Harris and the Georgia Forestry Association. But they did an addition, I think, next door is an office building, and they made it, for the large part, out of engineered wood. I haven't seen it yet in person, but I've seen pictures and it's beautiful. And that's kind of building that out, keeping carbon out of the atmosphere and in that building. And it looks great. I love being in a wood interior, but I'm a little bit biased.
Yep. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I think that a lot of people picture the Lorax, right? But I think
Yeah.
you guys you have financial incentives as well as like moral incentives to treat this land in the highest regard and to
Yeah.
steward it well.
Yeah.
And I think that for me and like other people that are laymen, like when we see a cornfield get cut down and harvested, we're like, oh, there'll be corn there next year.
Yeah.
But there's just this incredibly long horizon to put those trees back where they came from. And I think that a view of timber as being environmentally aggressive, if I'm trying to think of the right word, the view of timber and the harvesting of timber being bad stewardship is incredibly short-sighted. And I think the reality is that this is like a very long-term game. 50 years, not 5 years.
Yeah.
And so you're essentially, your cornfield is just on a 40-year turn.
Yeah.
And so that makes a lot of sense.
And people, kind of to your point, people typically picture like, oh yeah, these people just cut and run. No, we don't do that.
It's not a good investment, right?
Yeah, we try to be, like I said earlier, good stewards of the environment. We replant. We do everything that we're supposed to. There's actually a lot of certification bodies out there, Sustainable Forestry Initiative, FSC, and several others, PEFC, that, we try to get all of our properties signed up on.
Are these like LEED certification equivalents? It's like a LEED classified building, maybe not a one-to-one parallel, but like similar class. Okay.
Yeah. Basically, like you check these boxes, and you get certified in a similar manner. But there'll be like clear-cut restriction size, how far away your clear cuts can or can't be. Like if you cut a tract of property or a stand of trees, you need to let it get to a certain age of the regeneration that you've planted or naturally regenerated. It has to get to a certain height or a certain age before you can clear cut something next to it. Stuff like that.
Got it. Well, and you were sending me a text the other day, and I was talking about one of my clients having timber on their site, and your knowledge of like an individual tree's value based on like diameters at chest height and foot height, and like it was just incredible. It was just this vocabulary I'd never heard before, and it's clear that like you're like well trafficked. Okay, so let's transition from Timber 101 and switch over to Manulife's, I guess, strategy and your role within Manulife, and then also this broader industry. So for the folks that are listening that may not have a full appreciation, like how much timberland does Manulife own?
So I think as of the end of last year, it was just under $12 billion in AUM, and that's about, I think, 5.6 million acres globally. And we're in the U.S., Canada, Chile, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand. I think that's it.
So we just took a quick break there to take a look at context for 5.6 million acres. So we asked Handy ChatGPT to give us countries that are about 5.6 million acres. And so the list that popped up, we have Israel, Slovenia, El Salvador, and Qatar. So your timber holdings are essentially the size of those countries, which is just incredible to me.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot. I mean, every time I think of certain properties that have big contiguous chunks that are in the almost 100,000 acre range, I think of our small family farm that I used to think was huge. Very different context.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, so what's your role within the valuation and underwriting process?
So basically, if something requires a number to be put on it, it goes through my team. So that's everything from new acquisitions. We underwrite it, everything globally. We do have a colleague in Australia who handles a lot more of that stuff, but we still have a hand in it. Same with Brazil and South America. But so it's acquisitions. We have a hand in dispositions. We have appraisal reviews. So all the appraisals for all of our properties that we get appraised at least once a year for the most part. Those all get read by us. And then same with the long-term plans for our existing holdings and the comprehensive versions of that.
Okay. So we're putting numbers on things. And I feel like it may be easy to underestimate the granularity to which you go to put numbers on things.
Yeah.
And I remember we were at like a bike park pump track one day, and you were able to identify every species of tree and ballpark the diameter of them just by looking around this bike park that we were at. Okay, so this is slightly off script, but what buckets of money are you all deploying? I don't know if we can speak to the specific clients, but like how much of this is Manulife balance sheet? How much of this is separate accounts? Is it all Manulife? Like what's kind of the origination of the money that you guys are putting into timber?
So I can't really speak to like what percent of our AUM is with the general account or anything like that. But in terms of for the clients and how they view it, we're typically fall in either their real assets bucket, real estate bucket, sometimes their infrastructure bucket, and even sometimes like strategic alternatives and stuff like that. So we get viewed along that. But we have funds and separate accounts. That's on our website, so that's nothing I can't say.
Okay. The next one is like what risks are you stress testing for? The things that you have to think about when it comes to timberland are very different. And I remember a story, and you tell me if we can include this or not, but you were talking about having evaluated for like hurricane risk.
Yeah.
And there never having been a hurricane in this one specific spot for like hundreds of years, and then there was one brewing like shortly after.
I never really thought I was going to be analyzing NOAA data to look at hurricane tracks when I was in school either. But yeah, so we look at everything from hurricanes to, as of recent, it's been a lot of mill health. We've lost a lot of the pulp and paper mills this year domestically. There's no longer a paper mill on the coast of the Carolinas anymore. You and I were talking about
The Charleston one?
Yeah, the Charleston one. That's gone. IP Georgetown is gone. Several in Georgia are gone recently. Louisiana, Texas. And we got to think about which mills are receiving CapEx, what are they upgrading, and what hasn't really gotten any money recently. Mill health is a big issue, especially from a diversification standpoint, but it's everything under the sun. We try to make sure that we've at least thought about it.
Got it. And it would be ridiculous to assume that if you owned a piece of property on the East Coast that you would send that timber to a West Coast mill, right?
Yeah.
Like mill proximity is incredibly important. Like it's not transferable for the most part. Okay.
Yes.
I got to imagine it's extremely expensive to transport trees. Like when I'm seeing timber, it's rare that I'm seeing like 20 truckloads of timber on an interstate in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like usually that stuff is going from point A to point B pretty quickly. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then I guess others like that are just interesting or like fire, weather patterns. What about like pests regulation? Like
there was one EUDR. It's basically European deforestation regulation. Basically, that was contentious a little bit recently, more on the mill side. And I think the original objective was a good thing. They want to make sure that that forest products aren't coming from deforestation of the Amazon and things like that, which I'm very much in support of. But where that gets interesting is in the U.S., like we've been managing timber forever and the rules weren't quite clear enough. So that became a little bit contentious, so that's a big policy one. But yeah, fire, pine beetles, when it was dry and we had a couple of tornadoes going through kind of West Georgia, East Alabama, and in Louisiana, or they didn't have the tornadoes, but they had some beetles in Louisiana. Basically, trees, kind of like humans, when they're stressed out, they're a little bit more susceptible to disease and pests. So when a tornado went through West Georgia not that long ago, it turned into a beetle hotspot. That's something we got to think about.
Yeah. When we're evaluating a property, like things like fire, casualty, all that, like we're insuring against that, right? So we can go to the insurance markets and find someone, a carrier, who's going to insure us against those eventualities. In your world, like, can you insure against beetles? Can you insure against fire? Or do you just kind of have to eat it?
You can insure it. But one of the good things about trees, too, is that assuming it's not something completely catastrophic, like say it's just wind from a hurricane, it'll blow the trees over, but you can still go get them and then cut them up, sell them to a mill.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
It's called salvage logging. But oftentimes when you see that happen, you're not the only landowner that's dealing with it. So all of a sudden you've got a lot of wood flooding the market and you don't get the prices you would love to have.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's a little bit more expensive to get the guy to come out to your property as opposed to theirs.
Depends on relationships a lot of the time. But yeah, and they've got a lot of stuff they've got to drive over, a lot of road work they got to do to get in there after a hurricane.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure like scale and timber is hugely important as far as
Yeah.
like vendor relationships are concerned.
Yes.
Right.
Because loggers are hurting right now. Everything is more expensive for them, from equipment to insurance to trucking, fuel, everything, insurance. And that's what a lot of people don't realize is it costs money to cut trees down. And we have to take into consideration, like, all right, how much is it going to cost to do this harvest job? And then how much is it going to cost to get them to the mill, to your earlier point? And that's kind of when you and I were talking about, you had a client who had 50 acres. There is certainly a size threshold to where it doesn't make financial sense for a logger to go cut it. And that's where that becomes difficult.
Yeah. At least not one that maybe you would work with, right? Like this is a guy with a truck and a chainsaw that might tell you
there's some of those who'll do it, but they might not have all their teeth in
yeah.
their head.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just out of curiosity, like how long would it take to log an acre, right? Trying to extrapolate. Like if you're trying to do 100,000 acres or harvest 100,000 acres, which I doubt you do a harvest that big all at one time. Like how do you account for the time?
Weather is a big factor. So assuming all the conditions are great, I mean, you can move, 10 loads a day pretty easily, depending on how many crews you're running on a tract. But so if you have a big piece of property, you'll have multiple crews running, doing multiple different things, and you can get a lot done pretty quickly.
Yeah. So like, let's just say like 1,000 acres. If I wanted to log 1,000 acres,
Ballpark.
I was calling you. I was like, hey, I got 1,000 acre Skeet. How long is this going to take me to log this?
Yeah. Just because weather becomes a factor, whether we like it or not, and it can be a factor in the way you're not thinking about it, to where if it's too nice, the mills can sometimes have too much wood, and they'll put the loggers on quota, is what it's called. So they'll basically say, hey, you can only bring us so much wood this week. And that typically happens in the summer when everything's dry and you don't have to deal with any adverse conditions. But, 1,000 acres, I haven't been on the ground operationally in a long time, but you can easily get that done in, I would say, a quarter with cleanup and all that stuff.
Okay. So, I mean, that's serious time. It's not a week, right?
Yeah.
So that's something you've got to account for, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned the mills quite a bit. So are the mills paying Manulife for the timber, or are you paying the logger and then paying the mill and then paying and then selling to a downstream buyer?
So there's two different big systems. The Southeast runs on what's called a stumpage system for the most part, to where the landowner just receives net payment, usually on a per ton basis, for their trees. A lot of places run on what's called a wood dealer, where it's an intermediary between the landowner and the mill, and they kind of handle all the logistics, and they hire the loggers, and they hire the truck, and they're in charge of doing all of that. And so they kind of take a cut in between the two prices, more or less.
But the mill is your end buyer.
Mill is your end buyer. They're the ones who are ultimately paying you for the wood. For them, it's a cost center, but for a landowner, it's a revenue source. But out in the Pacific Northwest, it typically runs on a delivered system, to where we have to arrange all of that for our clients. So we'll have an agreement with the mill, an agreed upon price in a certain time frame, and then we go out and we will hire the loggers and the trucking firms to basically cut it down and get it to them.
Okay, so the mill exposure is hugely important.
Very.
And having good relationships with them, I'm sure, is just as important.
Yeah.
So can a single mill in one location monopolize a market, or do competitors sprout up?
It can get tough every once in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there are contracts you can enter into called wood supply agreements. Sometimes they can be a good thing, but sometimes they can be a bad thing, depending on, what the spot market pricing is relative to your agreed upon contract price. But it's basically a way for both the landowner and the mill to kind of hedge the volatility a little bit and say, hey, I'm going to promise you X amount of volume per year in return for this constant price. Sometimes it's indexed on, a publicly available published price, usually like Timber Mart South, which is out of the University of Georgia, or used to be run by the Frank Norris Foundation. But so you can run into stuff like that too, which will hedge it to a certain extent, but you could also miss out on some upside doing that too.
Yeah. So why are you on Industrial Voices? Like all these mills, all these trucks, all of this infrastructure, all of this stuff, like to me is deeply industrial in its nature. And so
like we were saying earlier, pallets
Yep.
inside of 18-wheelers, railroad ties, telephone poles, all that stuff's made out of wood.
Yeah. I'm deeply curious like about just the actual marketplace that has evolved around this, but like who on your team is handling the logistics of all of that, right? Like when I think of timber, like honestly, no offense, I think of it as being like a little sleepier. We got 50-year horizons, but I have to imagine like you guys are doing harvests every year in different locations around the country. Like this is an ongoing thing. Like you guys aren't taking a year off. Yeah. And so like, do you have an asset management team that directs that?
Yeah. So we are vertically integrated, which I am a big fan of because I can call a forester and say, hey, what prices are you getting? Especially from an underwriting standpoint, I've got all that data at my fingertips.
And for a person that's not in a forester is doing a lot of the things that we just described?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have an operations team where we have a lot of foresters who are on the ground making those decisions. They're doing everything from your fertilizer to the planting and everything in between. They're the ones who are kind of making that happen.
Okay, so your forester in your world is the equivalent of maybe an asset manager in my world overseeing industrial facilities.
Yeah.
Okay, so...
Yeah, so we've got a property management team, and then we've got the investment team, more or less.
Okay, and when you're saying property management, that would include forestry and the groups that are making those types of decisions.
Yes.
Okay, so in our world, like the asset manager is picking the brokerage team, the property management team, and then delegating to them the ability to go out and pick vendors for landscaping and roofs and door tracks and all that. Okay, so, and then valuations team maybe would be more reflective, maybe like the portfolio management team.
So we also have that.
Okay.
The valuation stuff, obviously, as we said, goes through my team. But we also have a portfolio. They're called Portfolio Management and Client Services. So they're the ones making, the actual portfolio management decisions. We give them the data and the tools to be able to make those decisions. That comes through my team. But, they're also the ones dealing with clients, answering their questions, having the annual quarterly meetings or whatever, making all that happen.
Okay. Last question in Skeet's role and Manulife strategy, like how important is diversification? It's like region, species, age classes, like how much of what it is you guys do on a day-to-day basis is driven by that?
Kind of just hitting on the mill example we were talking about earlier. If you have, which is a little more prevalent these days than it used to be, but if you only have one pulp and paper mill that you're selling your smaller logs to, and it shuts down, it's going to hurt.
Yep.
So having diversification from like how old is your forest? Like if you have everything that's the same age and you have, something happen to it, that's a little bit tougher than if you have a bunch of different ages. That also is big from a cash flow standpoint. If everything is the same age, you're going to have some lumpy cash flows. But if everything is a little bit more staggered, then you'll have a constant cash yield that's a little bit less volatile.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess parallel in our world, like most asset managers are trying to have a staggered roll of lease expirations. So you don't have 1 year where you've got 90% of your portfolio that expires and could potentially go vacant or dark. So you guys are trying to stagger those cash flows. So you may have a 100,000 acre OM that hits your desk and you're really excited about it, but you look at it and it's like, hey, the harvest years for this portfolio line up terribly with what we currently have.
Yeah.
Like we're essentially just putting more chips on 2024 or 2028 or 2040. And we just can't do that right now.
Yeah. And you see that in Brazil where Brazil is slowly becoming, or actually very quickly becoming kind of a hardwood pulp and paper powerhouse down there. I mean, it's kind of crazy how quickly it's growing and how much money is flowing into the new mills down there. But eucalyptus grows on a 7-year rotation. That's probably one of the shortest, if not the. So if you have everything the same age and something bad happens like a drought in one of those 7 years, that's going to hurt.
Yeah, that's tough. So it's interesting that you say the wood pulp stuff. Like I didn't realize wood pulp is one of the primary exports of the port of Savannah. So like the Southeast, like this is one of the biggest things we do is chop trees down and convert them to products.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Georgia, speaking of Savannah, Georgia at least is or used to be the #1 by GDP state-wise forestry state in the country.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Which makes sense as to why Terry College Business might be top of the list there.
Yeah.
And what's the name of the actual?
Warnell.
Warnell?
Yeah.
Warnell. Okay.
Yeah.
Which rolls up to Terry, correct?
Two separate.
They're separate. Okay.
Yeah. What to tie that knot, the forest business program that I went through is a combination of both. So if you have a forestry background, you can take more Terry classes in the masters, or if you don't have a forestry background, you can take more forestry classes. But you end up with both. Hence the name forest business.
Got it. And so tell me a little bit more about like, okay, all of us when we picture a 2x4 or like lumber that you can buy at Home Depot, like we know generally where that's going and how that's being used. But like wood pulp is a product where it's like, where's wood pulp going? And I'd heard my wife and I, we love Amelia Island, and there's a plant down there, and they make I think cellulose, is it, out of trees? And I think that cellulose can be used in like Parmesan products, like all kinds of stuff. And so I don't know if I've got any of that right, but talk to me about just like the end uses that may be surprising for wood.
LCD screens is one of them. Diapers, cardboard is a big one.
Yep.
So that was awesome for the most part during COVID when everybody was ordering things.
I'm sure of it.
That was great. Cigarette filters used to be a thing. I think they might still be. And it's actually in a lot of food as kind of like a thickening agent every once in a while.
Yeah, which is I think what the plant Amelia Island makes.
There's actually two down there. One is a West Rock mill on Fernandina.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, and there's another one down there too.
Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is kind of the ESG marketplace that's sprung up for carbon credits and those types of things. I know that solar and energy and other industries have these secondary marketplaces where they're selling credits, buying credits, doing those types of things. How does timber plug into that world?
The main thing that we do in the timber world is called improved forest management, where you have a baseline, like, okay, in a normal scenario, here's what my harvest schedule looks like. I'm cutting this amount of volume per year at this intensity, and here's what I'm getting for it. It needs to make financial sense, like it's got to be cash flow positive. You can't just make up some crazy number. Integrity is the name of the game, obviously. But kind of like how, I don't know if you're familiar with how conservation easements work, but the difference between your baseline and a less intense regime, very basic, high level, that spread is how you calculate carbon credits. And so you're basically saying, like, I'm leaving some trees on the ground that I normally wouldn't have, and they are sequestering carbon through the photosynthesis process, and that's where the credits come from.
Okay, so it has everything to do with how you're harvesting the trees and the choices you make or not harvesting the trees. Yeah. And then if you, like, let's just call it good boy behavior, but like if you guys do a lot of good boy behavior, you can then sell the benefits of having done that to other folks or transfer that to different portions of what it is you do. Yeah, and there's insetting and offsetting. A lot of the interest these days is from, some people who have a net zero target. And they say, all right, I want to offset some of my emissions. Take it, one of your big tech companies, so to speak. They will buy carbon credits to be able to offset some of the carbon emissions that they produce as a company. Next thing I want to talk about is just like, hey, let's talk about a flagship project. Like, tell us kind of a war story or a tale from the road where you guys bought something, you got into something, like you've done a fantastic job. Like, let's just highlight a project you've worked on.
So this is one of my favorites, actually. It's a great conservation story. So we were able to purchase an off-market deal from a company in Hartsville, South Carolina called Sunoco. Not the gas station, different. They turned their mill from taking virgin fiber, which is trees. They converted it to only run on recycled fiber, which is exactly what you think it is. They're taking recycling that you throw out from your house every day, and they basically will break that down in the mill and turn it into something new. So they no longer had a need for their about 55,000 acre land base that they're using to feed their mill to a certain extent. So we were able to negotiate that deal and purchase it from them a couple years ago, but it had a tract on it called Snow's Island. And Snow's Island supposedly is where Francis Marion, the swamp fox in the Revolutionary War, that was his base camp, so to speak, for when he would go out and, get in the trees and
This is Mel Gibson's The Patriot, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Snow's Island supposedly is where his base camp was, and that was on this property. And the state, and a lot of other conservation groups have been angling to try and get a hold of that for a long time. And, us being good stewards of the land, we're like, all right, yes, we would love to work with you on this. And we made it happen. And now that's working, or will be open to the public from what I understand, and will be, an awesome historic site and a big win for both parties.
So public-private partnership, does Manulife still hold title to it, or are we, okay, so it's transferred.
State.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that's neat.
Yeah. That's a really cool story too.
Yeah, I love The Patriot. Now, underwriting and financial metrics, how are you all looking at things typically? Like, I know you showed me an awesome chart with NPV. Like, are we looking at things from an IRR perspective, expected yield? I looked this up, rotation length. Like, how are you guys actually thinking about underwriting these things and valuing them?
So our bread and butter is probably going to be discounted cash flow model. Obviously, we'll back that up with some comps analysis and things like that, just like any other real asset. But cash yield's is important. IRR's important. With IRR, obviously, discount rate's important. But rotation age is kind of a factor into all of those different things. Like rotation age is what I was talking about when I was saying, oh yeah, you typically harvest a pine tree, call it 25 years old. 25 is the rotation age of loblolly pine in that case.
Yeah.
So it all kind of flows into, what we were talking about around like, hey, let's make sure the age class, which is, your average age of different stands of trees, is diversified enough to where we get, certain cash yield or an attractive cash yield off this property. Because kind of to our earlier point, sometimes a property will come on the market and it'll all be super young. Someone will have, cut everything really recently. You're not going to get a lot of cash off that. So that might not be something we are interested in at that moment. Usually those are really great for a long-term buy and hold for an investor who's willing to be patient with it. But a lot of people will get into timber because they want to get some cash off it for, a pension, endowment, et cetera. They've got cash flow needs.
So let's just say I brought you an OM with 100,000 acres of timberland. Walk me through, without telling us anything proprietary, like, how do you go about putting together a value on that? Like, I haven't even thought about, like, how do you find out what, and you think you call them stands? So are you breaking the land into stands?
Yeah.
And so like your timbers at different ages, like how are you finding out the timber age? Is this something provided in the OM? Is this like, talk me through just, hey, you get the OM, what do you do next? How do you get to a value?
So we will get the OM, and then we will typically get access to a data room where they will ideally provide us all kinds of information, like everything from, yes, this stand was fertilized at this rate this long ago. And these are the genetics that are in the ground, and we planted them at this density and this spacing, everything under the sun. The more data, the better for me. But, to your point about stands, just to make sure everybody knows what that is, say you've got a couple of different, or on a piece of property, you've got, say, like this corner over here is about 30 acres, and those are all the same age, but you've got a 50 acres over here that are a different age, planted at a different time. Those are individual stands. And so we will get shape files using, the typical Esri products, ArcPro, where we can look at that from a geospatial standpoint.
Yeah.
Which is big.
By the way, your knowledge of GIS you're probably top 0.001 percentile of people that I know. So like ArcGIS, correct? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that could be a whole nother conversation. But okay, so you're working with geospatial files, you're overlaying these stands onto the property.
Yeah. And so the way I will typically do it is, I'll look at the data, kind of see what kind of questions I'll have for the seller, and then we'll go out and take a look at it. And I will create some maps around different things I want to look at. Like, all right, where are the older stands that are ready to be harvested? And I'll kind of create a heat map on an iPad so we can go take a look, and also go out there and, because part of my job is to assess risk. Like, all right, where are some potential problem areas? Is there places where data integrity might be an issue? Is there something that might be typed out incorrectly? Different things of that nature. Yep. What's the quality of the roads? Everything in between.
And do you have someone go out and fly it? I remember that you, like, early in your career, when people asked me what Skeet Ponder was up to, I was like, I think he flies in helicopters and, like, looks at trees.
No, I wish. I do not do that. But people used to do that back in the day, back before we had all this geospatial technology.
Okay.
But aerial imagery is so good, especially from the Planet Labs folks. That's all you need.
Okay.
So if you think about 100,000 acres and trying to figure out, and you've got, X number of stands, which is a lot usually along that land base, the big goal is to try and figure out when you're going to cut that stand based on a bunch of different variables. So,
and you're assigning each stand theoretically like a serial number or a number. It's like stand 1145.
They have stand ID typically is what it's called.
And that would be almost like in a parallel to commercial real estate, like your suite number. So okay. And then all the attributes specific to that, when you're going to harvest it. And
yeah.
Okay.
So it'll typically tell you it'll be more or less a big Excel file, and you'll have the stand ID, and then it'll tell you what age it is, how much volume that stand has in it. Species, like, is this upland? How often can you harvest this? Is this 3-month ground, which means you can only really cut it 3 months out of the year. Usually it means it's wet or steep. Is a 6-month ground, everything you can possibly think of. And so we will use that information to make the decisions. And the hard thing is layering that in with your expense and price, all those different assumptions. Like, all right, how the heck am I going to figure out when to cut this thing ideally in a model?
Yeah.
We have a giant linear programming piece of software made by a company called RimSoft. It's called Woodstock. It is, I know it better than I probably would like to, but you load all this stuff in there and it'll run different iterations to try and figure out which scenario gives you the highest NPV, basically.
Okay.
Then you convert that. We've got a couple different tools that'll basically convert that into an Excel DCF.
And then you're able to plug those into your models.
Yeah.
Theoretically. Okay.
Yeah.
And then in our world, like, don't hate the player, hate the game. Like, everyone's brokering OMs. We're pumping up inflations like market leasing assumptions a little bit. Mm-hmm. We're doing this. What are the things in your world where you've got to, like, de-broker the model?
We see that from time to time, for sure. Like when someone, like in Maine, for example, sugar maple will produce, maple syrup, or most people have heard of that at this point. But different things you're told, like, oh, this has potential for this, or this has potential for this. Like, you need to check that. Not everything works from a sugar maple standpoint. For a sugar bush is what it's called. For kind of the non-timber traditional income streams, that's where we see a lot of it, or at least I've seen a lot of it, of like, oh, this has this potential, this has this potential. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Not always.
Okay. So that's the cash flow component of the equation. Now, you guys are holding on a 50-year basis. Like, how are you just using, like, typical inflation to adjust today's, like, harvest numbers to what they would be in the future? Or, like, how are you guys thinking about, like, if it costs me, I don't know, I'm just picking a random number, $1 a tree or $5 a tree. Actually, what is it? Like, if I'm harvesting a tree?
Depends on the product.
Okay.
So just very briefly, I'll just use pine trees as an example. You've got 3 main products, and that's dependent on the size, kind of what you were hitting on earlier. The top, how long is the tree? What's the diameter of the top of that tree at a certain length? And then kind of how big is it at the bottom of the tree? The 3 main products are called pulpwood, chip and saw timber, in ascending order. Saw timber, ballpark, would hope to expect like mid-20s.
Per tree?
Per ton.
Oh, per ton.
Per ton of trees.
Wait, so let me just say that another way. Like, we're talking like $25 per ton.
Per ton. So that's why we grow.
What's a ton of trees? Is that like, I'm thinking
Like when I picture an 18-wheeler loaded down
Yeah.
with trees, how many tons is that? Like 5?
So you're capped at 80,000 pounds on a truck. Usually, I think you're about 40,000 pounds on a trailer. About half that, I would say.
Okay.
I haven't done that math in a while. So,
Yeah, no, sorry, getting real niche here.
Yeah.
But I was just curious.
I always have to go back and kind of remember, like, kind of use my fingers to count it out. But about that.
Okay.
So that's why a lot of foresters think in loads more
Got it.
so than anything.
Got
But
it. Okay, so we've got this assumption, mid-20s per ton.
Yeah.
And now that's today, 2025.
Yeah.
Now what is it going to be in 2075?
So that's where it gets proprietary.
Okay.
Everybody's got a different price curve based on what they think the housing market's going to do for saw timber. Housing starts is a big factor there. But the other two, chip and saw, which, you're basically getting a lot of your smaller dimensional out of. And then it's because it's chip. Chip goes into pulp paper type stuff and OSB. But then the middle of that tree basically is smaller dimensional. And
Okay.
then pulp and paper. So you got to have a different forecast about what all those 3 different markets are going to do.
Okay. And then that's 1/3 of the value is the income, right? And then the other 2/3 are the appreciation in the land. And I'm assuming that's probably proprietary as well.
Yes, but you do have the biological component that I was hitting on earlier, where your trees will get older, and so you've got inventory of trees basically is a big part of the equation. So when you have more bigger trees because they've grown for 10 years, so to speak, it's going to be worth more.
Okay. I see that. So that you can actually triangulate with relative certainty like what the cash flow will be on the go forward, and you can do a DCF backwards at that certain point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
There's a lot of work, a lot of professors have figured out how pine trees will grow, how quickly, how long it'll take, and that's a big part of our models.
Yeah. So we use cap rate in our world as kind of our snapshot value metric. Like, what is there an equivalent in your world?
We'll typically use discount rate.
Okay.
Based on a survey from a consultant that I read recently, it's typically real rates, but it's between, it's around mid-single digits,
Okay.
a little bit under that.
Got it. All right. Now talk to us about what's next for timber.
So there's a couple things that I'm excited about. The cross-laminated timber, the mass timber that I was talking about earlier that's in Ponce City Market or next door to Ponce. That's a really cool technology that's kind of just starting to get a little bit more traction because building codes needed to be revised to make that happen. Sustainable aviation fuel is very cool. We're starting to see a little bit more interest in that. And one of my kind of pet projects, so to speak, is with data centers, the demand for power is now and growing exponential. In the UK, they use basically little tiny wood pellets to fire some of their power plants. And especially with some of the mills that have gone down recently, those small economies are hurting. The little towns who relied on paper mills, they're in pain right now. So if we could get some traction from a legislative standpoint and, a capital standpoint around making some of those in the U.S., I think it would check a lot of boxes.
So wood-fired power production. So John Gray, in his view from the top, he was talking about utilities becoming a growth sector, which is just interesting. There's going to have to be innovation there.
Yeah.
We can't just do what we've been doing and a little bit better or a little bit more of it. We have to actually change that game. And nuclear takes you 10 years to get it on the ground. So wood pellets, you're saying, and I think that could be realistic, is maybe a coal alternative or a coal supplement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can do
makes
that
sense.
now.
Yeah.
And it's renewable.
And I didn't realize this, but at certain temperatures, you can burn the smoke off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
It doesn't
much so.
necessarily have to be a smokestack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anytime you see smoke, that's incomplete combustion.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Solo stove, shout out.
Yeah.
Okay. So, how are global markets and the things that are happening right now influencing timber demand on the downstream?
Tariffs are interesting, especially between us and Canada right now. That's pretty contentious, depending on which side of the aisle you're on. Because we actually were a net importer, I believe, from Canada of softwood lumber. But there are duties, countervailing duties on that, and have been for a while. But those have been increased in the last year. And then there's now tariffs on top of that. So that's interesting. A lot of the kind of pulp and mostly wood pulp and sometimes chips, like I was saying earlier, comes out of Brazil these days. There are no tariffs on those, if I understand correctly. So that's affecting the domestic pulp and paper industry a little bit too.
We're also recording as of November 6th, so this could be entirely different by
This
November
could be.
7th.
It very much could be. And not to mention, China used to be a big player in terms of taking our logs and our products and all of that, but they've turned that faucet off recently.
All right, and then spot price of timber. What does that tell us about the broader economy? Is there anything we can read into there, or is that a no comment?
So this, I'm going to try to not make this a rabbit hole, but pre-GFC, they were pretty strongly correlated. But now that post-GFC, it's not as strongly correlated. But you can see, pulp and paper is a pretty good barometer for what the packaging industry is doing.
Timber pricing tells us about housing starts and tells us about packaging, shipping, logistics, handful of those types of things. And I think housing starts down, packaging, shipping, logistics, inventory down. Like that makes sense that would move timber down, and that's reflected in timber pricing right now, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
It's not as correlated as it used to be, but it's still there.
Yeah. Well, and I think just in our group chat, there's a bunch of guys apparently timber pricing can actually be really decoupled from the economy in some instances, right?
Yeah. Like for example, the Fernandina mill that you were talking about. When you think about where they can source wood from, because they're on the coast, it's a semicircle instead of a full circle, and so it's a lot more competitive down there, at least used to be before some of the mills got shut down, but they had to pay more because they're competing a little bit more for the same wood in a semicircle, basically.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have even thought about that. Couple of final questions here. One is, and I know you're excited to talk about this, what's one sustainability practice that you'd love to see adopted everywhere?
So we have a manager of oil and gas mineral leases, Britt McMillan, who's a great guy. He has been implementing some language in our contracts where if we have a power line right away, so to speak, or oil, gas, whatever, usually they've got to plant that in grass, keep cover on it, et cetera. But he's been starting to toy with the idea of making that be pollinator habitat type grasses instead of just regular fescue or whatever ryegrass, which is awesome for the dwindling honeybee population in the country.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, so that's near and dear to both my and my wife's heart a little bit.
And is there a massive cost differential there, or is it just, hey, we're putting this seed instead of that one?
Yeah,
it's just
that.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's huge. Those are the types of things that make a monumental impact.
Yeah, and you think about how many power line right-of-ways crisscross our country. That's a lot of acreage that adds up.
Interesting. That's really cool. Okay, then one common mistake people make when they're evaluating timber investments. What's the rookie move?
Not realizing how much it costs to get wood to a mill.
Okay.
Yeah, that's very underrated. Kind of to what we were talking about, where 50 acres is kind of the bare minimum. It's because, our good friend Ty will often call me hey, how much is this tree in my backyard worth? Or, I get that call all the time. Luckily, I spent a little bit of time as an arborist in college, but one tree is not going to cut it.
Doesn't cover the transportation cost. Yeah, no pun intended. Okay. For executives that are listening who may never have thought about timber, when should they reach out to you or Manulife, and then how can they get exposure to timber? So
I would recommend they reach out to our head of capital formation, managing director, Mike Strelecki. That's his job. And then they can get a hold of me on LinkedIn.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. That's it for this episode of Industrial Voices. Skeet, appreciate you coming in and sharing what it is that you know about the space with me and the rest of the listeners.
Yeah, man.
Until
Thanks
next
for
time.
having me.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on the Industrial Voices podcast. Appreciate you tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to this show on your preferred platform and consider sharing with a friend. And if I can be of any help to you or your team regarding your real estate, please email me or visit my website, info in the show notes.